Okay, so we are broadcasting. We'll just wait a few minutes to allow also our online audience a chance to join us here for this evening's presentation, but we also are delighted of our in-persons. So we're trying out a new format for tonight's event, taking place both in person and simultaneously streaming online, both on the Siena Art Institute's Facebook page and YouTube channel. So as people are starting to join us, our online audience, first let me say thanks for joining us. This conversation tonight is with Mashuq Mushtaq Deen, who is currently in residence here at the Siena Art Institute. So we're delighted to have him not just tonight, but for this whole month-long residency, actually a 6-week residency that he's had here. So it's been a real pleasure to have Deen as part of our community here at the Siena Art Institute. I'll mention both to our in-person audience as well as to our online viewers that we welcome questions and comments, both in person and online. You can ask questions in the comment section. We'll take time to respond to you in the second part of today's presentation. So it's my sincere pleasure to introduce our speaker, Mashuq Mushtaq Deen, who is a true delight to have as part of our community this month. Deen is a resident playwright at the New Dramatists in New York City. Is also a Playwright Center core writer, a Lambda Literary Award winner, and a recipient of a James Baldwin Award. His full-length plays include Flood, The Empty Place, The Betterment Society, The Shaking Earth, Draw the Circle, and Take the Course. Deen's work has been presented, developed, and supported by a number of institutions, including New Dramatists, the Sony Writers Conference, the Sundance Institute, as well as other centers such as the Blue Mountain Center, the McDowell Colony, the Bogliasco Foundation, the Helene Wurtzer Foundation, the New York Foundation for the Arts, as well as institutions such as Georgetown University, Hampshire College, Pace University, Dixon Place, the Passage Theater, the Beat Festival, Queen's Theater in the Park, the Berkshire Fringe Festival, and many more. Deen is a member of the New York Theater Workshop's Usual Suspects, the Mayu Writers Lab, and is a founding member of the Public Theater Alumni Writers Group and the Dramatists Guild. He earned his MFA from the Actors Studio Drama School, the New School for Drama, and currently is represented by the Gurman Agency. So as Deen begins his presentation, let me just remind our viewers again here and online that we welcome your questions, which will take time to respond to during the second part of today's talk. So for now, Deen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I always find that the most painful part of all presentations is to listen to the things you've done. Thank you for being here. Thanks to my friends, Jeffrey and Valeria. My talk is called Makito Kitelo Fafare. Who makes you do it? But who's making you do it? And I think that is really apropos of what we do as artists. It is sometimes torturous, it is not always pleasant, and yet this is the life I have chosen for myself. So who is making me do it but myself? To get started, well, first I want to say I am not an academic. So I cannot distill my trajectory or work into any sort of linear line or thing that is easy to comprehend. I'm going to throw a lot of weird stuff at you, probably out of order, and you will make the best of it that you can, and I will answer any questions that you have, and then there will be wine. And I'm here for the wine. I'm going to start, so you have a sense of, I think, the texture of my work. It's very difficult as a playwright to show you what I do because there are multiple actors that would be required to do it well. So what I've decided to do is just present a very short piece that I wrote. It's in a sort of monologue form. It's called Question, Verb, the Imperative Form. It was written for an evening of shorts in New York City that was supposed to bring attention to the way the theater industry treats various minorities within the industry. And so this night was supposed to be about gender and specifically about issues around actors and makers who are transgender. And there's a lot of frustration I think, in the room about the industry, and I felt that there was an easy way that we were talking about it, and I wanted to complicate that. And so this is what I wrote. Why do people see us in these ways, as these exotic or perhaps confusing identities? Why do people sensationalize what it is to be transgender? Why must it be glamorous or tragic? Of course, sometimes it is glamorous or tragic, but why is that the only story ever told? Is that for ratings, or is that the way people see us? Can you imagine a boring trans person who you might see every Sunday at church? Can you imagine that you discover that he or she or they are not boring a month after meeting them, when you realize that they are a wonderful cook? That their cooking skills are what make them interesting, if not glamorous or tragic? What is this they? And more importantly, why do we never talk about church, about worship, about faith? And why did I digress? When confronted with trans folks, why do people feel confusion? Where does the confusion come from? Do they feel that confusion to be threatening to their own identities? Do they feel like it's unfair that this is happening now? Where was the movement when it could have helped their younger selves? Do they feel they are too old to learn new words? Too old to create space for new meanings between the words they've already learned? And where do the new words come from? Who created them? If language is indicative of the way we think, is it possible to change the way we think with new language? How has language evolved so quickly? What if a person can't keep up? What if a person feels lost, like everyone knows something and they do not? What do they do with that feeling? And how to catch up? Is it possible to catch up? When sometimes it becomes hard to remember why we even walked into the kitchen, how are we to remember the changing nature of pronouns? Is it bad now to be a man or a woman? Are those things wrong? What if people care but are afraid? Afraid to be wrong, to get it wrong? Afraid to hurt a friend, a potential or possible friend, by getting it wrong? Would it be better not to speak? Is it better not to speak than to get it wrong? How does one practice to get it right? How is it that you can say they so easily and I cannot? Am I stupid because I cannot say the words very easily? Do you think I am stupid? What if you have spent your life trying to be good, to do it right? What if it hurts to be told that you are doing it wrong? What if you mean well? Do intentions count for anything anymore? What if you are not perfect? What if perfection feels beyond you? Is it the journey or the goal? If theater is about the human struggle, why does it seem like we prize getting it right over mucking around in the mess? Why is mucking so messy? Why does it feel so messy? Why do we sometimes feel bad about ourselves when we are covered in muck? What is this muck that he keeps talking about? Can I be a good person even if I'm covered in muck? Who decides if we are good people? Who is the arbiter of good and not good enough? When I am alone in the dark night of my soul and I wonder whether I am good enough, who will send an answer that I am able to hear? Again, one must ask, why do we never talk about God? Who is it that can see inside my heart? Who is it that knows what I meant to do even though I failed? Who is it that tells us that to fail is not to be a failure? Who is it that loves me when I cannot fathom deserving love? When the world tells me I am not good enough as I am, when I tell me I am not good enough as I am, who will intervene? Who will love me anyway? Who will teach me how to love? Who will teach me how to see what is meant, what is intended? Who will teach me how to forgive? Who will teach me how to love? How did I survive it all? How did I not end up dead? How was I that fortunate? Who taught me to forgive myself? How will I teach others? So, to me, like, there's a texture in that piece that I think is consistent in my work, which is one, things are really complicated. There is no easy goods and bads. Two, vulnerability is really important in my work. For me, it is really important that I take myself to a place where I am extremely vulnerable. And if I haven't, then I haven't done it well. If it doesn't hurt a little bit or feel really scary to share it with you, then I have not done my job as an artist, to me. When I was on a residency, all the visual artists had these aesthetics that they had on their websites. And I was like, why can't writers have aesthetics? So I put one on my website now because I wanted one. And it's a Rumi poem. And I think it's important to me. And it goes, the way of love is not a subtle argument. The door there is devastation. You cannot tell the truth without love, and part of love is devastating. Like, it is just a part of like how we live together. And so that is also an important part of my work. Now I will show you some pictures. We'll see if they're interesting. So the first pictures are just so you can have a sense of maybe what my work looks like on stage, because as a theater maker, it's very hard to show you. This is my first sort of work that I think got me, I don't know, established. It's a solo piece that I wrote. I performed in it. It's called Draw the Circle. It's autobiographical, but I didn't play myself in the piece. So I changed the form a bit by just having all the characters mostly angry at me, like talk about me. And then in the course of the piece, you understand who I am and what my journey has been. I did this piece for 3 or 4 productions. It actually became so difficult to do the piece that I had to cancel productions and then just say I'm not available to perform it anymore because it was just too difficult. And sometimes in the writing of something, there's a way that I take something difficult outside of myself. In the performing of it repetitiously night after night, I found that I was actually pulling it back into myself. And if there was some wall between the past Dean and whatever I went through 20 years ago and now, the wall started to get eroded by the constant performance, so I had to stop doing it. However, I really love these photos because I have hair on top of my head. I have more hair than I will ever have again on top of my head, and so I love these photos. This is just to give you a sort of, this is another piece I worked on. It's called The Betterment Society. And so a lot of the work I do is in workshops, which means I'm in a room, a bunch of actors are there, we're talking about the work. In this one in particular, I was exploring whether there was what the puppet would look like in the piece. And I had written it in, and so we got puppeteers in the room. And this is just fun to see it move. It's insane. These puppeteers each day created a brand new giant puppet and moved it around, just so we could see how it moved, what it took, how fast or slow we could use it, how the actor would interact with it. Here's another puppet they created on another day, and here is another puppet they created another day. And I show this because I think it's really interesting. What's interesting here is what I learned at the end of this workshop is there's no puppet in this piece. That the puppet actually was an idea that could not work in the piece that I had written. And so what I did at the end of it was take the puppet out and replace it with 3 or more bodies who would all be dressed the same, wearing a neutral mask. So then there's a fluidity to it without the sort of cumbersomeness of the central puppet. But I didn't understand that because I hadn't worked with puppets before, and so I had to learn that. And then these are the last pretty pictures I have. It was a production I wrote 2 years ago And a university produced it, and universities have lots of money, so it looks very pretty, and the photos look very pretty. The other thing, this is a reading, so most of my readings look like this. It's just a lot of chairs, and then kind of like here, we would rehearse all day, and then you would all come in, and we would all sit, and we would do the work. And so a lot of my time is spent like this. And to me, this is actually some of the most exciting time, because it's about talking about the characters and what they want, and the actors aren't there to criticize, they're there to understand. And so it's almost like having 7 people inside of your dream trying to figure it out, and you get to listen to them trying to figure it out, and it's fascinating. These next set of photos are all about residencies, because residencies are a big part of what I do, or a big part of how I understand my process as an artist. And so I do a lot of weird stuff on residencies that are outside of my writing genre. So at one residency, I decided to make block prints for a while. These were some block prints I made. I have a couple of puppets that often come with me. They didn't come with me here. Sometimes we make videos. I have fun with them. I did not bring my Eeyore suit, but I often bring an Eeyore suit to a residency. And so this one was the first one I got it. I was in New Mexico. And so as an experiment, I took my table from my apartment, I put it in a field, and I invited all the other residents to have tea with me. And what they had to do was, there was a bowl of questions that invited a certain vulnerability. If they chose to answer a question, I would bring them a piece of cake. And then I dressed as this Eeyore suit and would just sit with them and have this tea. I did not know that Lisa, the other artist, had also bought an Eeyore suit. So she came to the tea in her Eeyore suit, and we ended up being 2, and she bicycled into the field, and we ended up being 2 Eeyores sitting at tea, and it was the best. And when we went to another residency together, just coincidentally, we decided to bring our Eeyore suits, so we had a photo shoot that was us in our Eeyore suits. And that's my favorite one. And it is funny, but part of it is also like, what is play, what is silly, what is unexpected, what do I need to do to invite you to open up? And that is, I don't know how that intersects with my work exactly, but it is part of what I do, and I try to just go with it and see where it leads me. This is just a quote that I really like. Every choice we make, everything we do can be guided by either a me-centered or we-centered mindset. And I include that because, and I'll talk more about this, but values are very important to me in my process. Like, and so in my work, I'm often frustrated by the sort of us and them narratives of the world. And what I want to do is make that not possible. Make only a we possible, or an us possible, because it's too hard to draw lines between who is us and who is them. Okay, so this next part is inspired by Laura, who gave me some thoughts about what I should do today. So this is an example of when I'm working, and right now I'm working on this, a couple of projects, but one of them is like an old style radio drama that will be staged live with sound effects. So it's actually a live theater piece that's meant to be recorded. But this is what it looks like when I work. I have a big giant sheet of white paper. I write very small. And spatially, I start to figure out where things go by saying, okay, the lamppost is important. It goes more in the center, but it's a little above. I hear sounds. I'm going to write down what the sounds are. So everything sort of takes place on the page, and I start to figure out what the relations are. And at some point, I'll say, oh, that one doesn't fit anymore. I'll take it out. It's a little bit like a colander. I put a lot of stuff in it, and I see what falls away, and I see what won't fall away, what is so irritatingly stuck into my brain. And then I know that will have to be in the piece somehow. And earlier on in my artist career, I used to feel like every idea I had was potentially brilliant, and I didn't want to forget it. So I wrote them all down, and I put them in a box, and I had like 50 ideas of the things I was going to write. And I eventually threw away the box, because I can spend 1 to 3 years writing a play, if I'm going to do that, that idea has to be so irritating slash like interesting to me that it never goes away, that it won't leave me alone. And then I start to write it. So now I think if an interesting idea comes, if it's gone tomorrow, it wasn't meant to stay. I'm not going to worry about it. But for some pieces, the same scene or the same two characters have been with me for a long time, and I know that I will need to write about them. So that's part of mine. And then this is when Lisa asked me to do this, I thought, okay, so this is how I started to map out what I would talk to you about today. And I said, I can't make any sense of it, but we'll try and touch on some of these things and we'll see what happens. And that's, I don't know, that's like how my brain works. I don't think every writer's like that. It's just how I work. So some of the things on this are, where did I come from? So all the things that make up who I am, from my identities and who I love and faith and geography, all that is a part of my lens. How I digest the world around me, how I'm involved in it, care about it, read about it, get frustrated about it. That's also my continued growth as a person. To me, all of those things are like shining your prism. And as an artist, I don't feel like I, in some ways, actively write. I clear myself out, make myself as good of a prism as I can be, and then I try and allow things to come through me. And if work is really good, then I won't exactly know what I'm writing until I start writing. I won't know where it's going. It will surprise me. Hopefully I'm challenging myself all the time in the process of it, and challenging the people around me. That's important to me. But that, I guess, goes to this part here that I think it's also an acting thing. There's a, like in yoga and in acting, there's this thing between like effort and release. You have to find the balance between not pushing too hard, but you also have to show up and do your work. So like somewhere between trying but not trying too hard is like the sweet spot. And for writing too, I have to sit down, I have to be determined and diligent. And if I push it, it'll be too much about what I want to say, and it won't be right. I won't tell the truth if I'm trying too hard to tell you something. Because I think the real truth is something that I haven't quite discovered yet, and I'll discover it in the writing of it. What else can I say? On the right, for me, my most important, it's right here. For me, my most important path is my spiritual path. It's always been a really important part of my life. I can't say why. It's not really tied to religion in any way, but it's very specific and personal. And I don't find that at odds with my artistic path. I was telling Jeffrey this, I think of what I do as a crucible. It's really, I think if I talked about my writing, people would be like, why do you write? You sound so miserable. And it's like, I am miserable a lot of the time when I write. But it's like this crucible that I force myself through, and I think it does something to me, and that's part of me becoming a better person. I have to confront what I feel about failure, what I feel about what other people think of me, get all the editors that are really all of you out of my head, and be in a quiet place with myself. What am I like when that happens? I like the metaphor of Jacob wrestling with the angel, because I think you are somewhat injured in the process and changed by it. But the wrestling is still good and important. I now think that, and maybe this will change in time, I now think that the writing that comes out of it in some ways is the byproduct of the wrestling, but the more important work is the work I do to wrestle with myself and understand things, understand who I am in relation to other people, my flaws. Earlier in my work, there was definitely times when I wanted to say something to you. I had to tell you about how I'm different in the world, or I had to tell you why this horrible thing that happened in global politics is blah, blah, blah. I had to do all those things. And I think they're good pieces of work, but my work has evolved to a place where now, maybe it's because I'm more interested in existential questions in a different way that I feel like where I do is I go somewhere dark and I see an image, and maybe it's a room or two people talking, and I follow it, and I don't know what's happening exactly. I always have an idea that I'm going to write about this, and I always end up writing about that, and I don't know how that happens. It just happens. And I think my journey as an artist partly is to trust that some part of me knows what's happening, and even if you're wandering around in the dark, I have to just do it anyway, even if I don't know where I'm going and if I'm a little scared of the journey. I think that something where maybe my faith and my journey as a writer meet are, as a writer, you're a little bit like God. You know everything about the world and why, to a certain degree, like all the ways people are interacting and probably even what they fear in ways that they don't know what they fear. And so I feel that I'm able to see my characters, and all characters are flawed. They're not interesting if they're not flawed. The most boring character on stage is a perfect character. And what makes them endearing and why we love them is because they are flawed and they struggle so hard to overcome or to do something in spite of their flaws. And I think something in theater that's interesting is we're able to find compassion for those characters in a way that we are not able to find that compassion for ourselves. And why? Or not why, but that's just true. And like, how can I someday move to a place where I could find more compassion for myself as if I were a character, or for other people around me? How long have I been talking, Lisa? Have I used
5 minutes.
What else can I tell you? I feel like I do well with questions. Oh, doing versus being. Something that, I said this at another artist studio gathering, and people were like, oh, and I don't know why, but for most of my younger life, I wanted so badly to be a writer. Like, I wanted the validation of like a publication. Someone says, you are not just a wannabe writer, you are a writer. And then I became a writer. And it was good, but also very stressful. And then a couple of years ago, one of my residencies, I came to this, through this wrestling, this sort of realization that I'm not a writer. I am someone who writes. And what I mean by that is not that I'm not good at what I do. I'm good at what I do. What I mean by that is that my worth does not come from my writing. And it's very hard. I think a lot of the difficulty in writing and why it's so fearful is that we can often feel like, even if my last play was good, if this next one's not good, they're not going to like me. I'm no good in the world. I have no more meaning. What I mean is that my work and the success of my work does not give my life value. Because I have value, my work comes from that value. It's still an effort for me to like switch it, because everything about our society and everything about everything tells us that we have to earn our value by doing something worthwhile. And I think it's important to reverse that and say we are worthwhile. From that, what will we make? And just because I can write it down doesn't mean I've like integrated it holistically into my body. But that is like part of this journey. And then in 10 years, I don't know what I'll say to you about it then. Maybe I'll have decided I am a writer again because of this other thing. It's like layers of an onion. It's not like a linear thing, but another layer comes off, another layer comes off, and you discover something deeper and under. There's probably 10,000 things I was going to say that were very interesting that I've lost sight of. And so I'm really great with questions. Perhaps
we could start if there were any questions from our in-person audience.
I have a question. I'm really interested in the autobiographical piece you wrote, and you talked about the challenges for you to continue to perform it.
Yeah.
When you wrote it, did you envision yourself being always the actor, or do you think someone else could potentially do it, and how would that feel?
At the time, I envisioned myself doing it Oh, yes, sorry. The question was, Withdraw the Circle, my first piece. I said that there were difficulties with continuing the performances of that. And so when I wrote it, and correct me if I'm wrong, did I envision myself performing it, or did I think other people could perform it? Is that right? When I wrote it, I envisioned myself performing it for two reasons. One, there are not that many actors who are transgender and South Asian and can act that I knew about at that time in New York. So just who would we cast? Two, I chose the solo format because it is really intimate and I wanted to use that. And I knew if I performed it, I would make it that much more intimate because the audience would always be looking at the person that all of this happened to. That said, I do think other people can perform it. Interestingly, I think the fabric of the piece is more cultural than about, for instance, the gender identity specifically. So I feel like if one actor performs it, they would have to be South Asian in some way, because the family is such a big part of, and their struggle with it is such a big part of it. There's also a version that I wrote that I said, what if 3 or more actors performed it in a sort of presentational way? And that way, no one actor has to hold a 90-minute show. And a 90-minute show for any solo performance is an athletic thing. It is very difficult on the voice. It's very difficult. You have no one else to rehearse with. You are just, I talk nonstop for 90 minutes without a break, without any water. And I remember asking my director, so, because we used to do readings and I had a little glass of water and I had a podium and I would take a sip. The whole audience would stop. And I said, so Che, where does my water live on this stage? And he said, there's no water in this play. He said, when you're done with the play, you can have some water. And there's just, I would take pauses that are about getting more saliva in your mouth and things like that. Like characters that are free, like free up your body because the other characters are so tense. It is just, it's exhausting. So physically, it's an exhausting thing to do, which is part of why I created a many actor version of it, so that people in communities where maybe someone didn't have the stamina to do that could still do the play. But it was hard. It was hard because it was the thing at that moment that was making my career, and I knew it. It was my first DC run, New York run. I was getting reviewed. It seemed like it might be a career suicide to stop performing it. I was supposed to do Philly, and then potentially I could have done a tour. But at some point, it just wasn't good for me anymore. And I would always say to artists, like, don't kill yourself for a show. It's just a show. There will be another show. You will write another play. You will write another book. You'll write another, make another sculpture. Like, you are more important than this piece or than that review or than that work. And it didn't kill my career at all. It's fine. And also, this is so old to me now. Like, I love it and I'm proud of it, but like the things I'm exploring are like well beyond this. And I'm glad I'm doing that in other ways. And I like being behind the table and listening to actors do what they do. I like bringing in puppeteers and actors who specialize in clown work and all kinds of stuff. Long answer to your question, but that's my, I told you I'm great with questions. I can just talk forever.
I don't know if other people in our in-person audience have other questions or reflections. Yeah.
If you're working at piece 1 to 3 years to write, are you focusing solely on that work, or are you experimenting in other pieces, or working on other things while you're writing?
That's a good question. The question is, if a piece can take me 1 to 3 years to write, during that time, am I just focused on that, or am I working on other things at the same time? Yes and no, meaning I don't work on 2 big pieces at the same time. I know there are people a lot of people in my field who write for the theater also write for TV, and they will try and write both of those at the same time. I don't do that. But during the course of any year, I get commissioned to write an essay, a short play, a thing, and I will work on short pieces at that time. But when I work, I do my best work at a residency when I'm cut off from my life. I can put the responder on my email that says I'm not home for a month. And because I need to be in the world of it. I think partly because I'm seeing it as I go. I'm not just like, oh, it'd be really interesting if there was a car here, I'll write in a car. Like, I have to see it and feel it. And one thing I didn't say about my work is that I think about it musically, which means when a character's speaking, it's like they're one instrument. And I was like, okay, they're quiet, that's good. But at some point I was like, okay, now there needs to be two, or there needs to be like a lot of instruments. We need to get like big. Then we can drop down again, and then we can sustain a little bit of quiet. But that's how I feel the piece, and I know when it's right because it's like I can hear that it's in harmony or it's not. So I can't do that and work on multiple pieces at the same time in that way.
Before the question, I can't resist the comment. I don't know how much praise you can deal with.
Oh.
I have a truckload of practice, right? Love your work, and also fantastic presentation.
Oh.
But also focus on questions.
You gave me my title, Jeffrey.
Oh, there you go. No, it's really beautiful. In a way, thinking about Draw the Circle, but not only. Could you comment on, it's wonderful how vulnerable and intimate your work is. Do you think there's a paradoxically almost a kind of strength or armor that comes from being vulnerable?
So the question is, I'm not gonna say it all right, but like in the vulnerability, like my work can be very vulnerable. Is there a strength or an armor that comes in that kind of vulnerability? Yes. I think that that vulnerability is, like true vulnerability is strength. With Draw the Circle, at the end of that show, I have told you every secret about myself. There's nothing you can say that can hurt me. I've revealed it all on my terms. You know, you can like me, you cannot like me, none of it. But I actually feel that in that moment, I am in a position of great strength because I've been so vulnerable. And I think it's a shame that like in society, we often see vulnerability as a weakness. I think that the protecting ourselves and the hiding is actually where the weakness probably comes in. We become a different kind of vulnerable there. So there was more I was gonna say, but that's, yeah, just that. And I think that vulnerability, one is like, it's part of what's devastating about caring about each other in the lives that we lead, is that it makes us vulnerable. It's part of, but that is part of the beauty of what it is to care about people, is to take that risk with them. And so I think it is a centerpiece of my work and about finding ways to come together across disparate lenses, is to find the place that loss is loss. Heartbreak is heartbreak. Even if like you hate each other and you don't have the same politics, you probably still know what grief is because everyone knows somebody who's died. It's just, these things are very common to us even across great chasms of thought or values. Laura, what do you think of my handwriting?
Well, one question is asking more about your experience with residencies.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes residencies are a chance just to shut yourself off from outside distractions, have time and space just to really focus on your work. Other times, residencies can be an opportunity for exchange with other artists, fewer interactions, or also interactions with different cultures.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you could maybe speak to that.
Sure.
Are there any cultural intersections, either positive or negative, that came through your residencies?
Yeah, to me, the chance to get outside of my locale, I live in New York City, is great on a personal level because I like getting out of the city, but it is also great because everywhere I go has its own culture and its own landscape. And I think it's important to challenge my own culture or my sense of what is a norm by going to other cultures and seeing what their norms are, and then understanding how my norms don't make sense in this place. Also, a landscape is really important in my work. It takes on an almost character feel. And so, for instance, being here, or like I went to Wyoming for 3 weeks, and I went to New Mexico for 3 months once. That spaciousness is very important in the texture of my plays, and it has meaning in ways that I don't fully understand, but I know that I'm starting to wrestle with, there's a fear in too much spaciousness too, and too much time, and what happens when people are sort of stuck in too much space. So they're very important. I think the residencies themselves, like to me, it's very interesting and fruitful to talk with other artists about their work, especially artists who are not theater makers, because we start to talk about the things we love and value, and not just bitch about the things we hate about in our industry. Like, I hate my agent. I happen to love my agent, but most people in theater seem to hate their agents. Or whatever, it's not fair, I'm not getting produced, that person got produced more than me. All of that stuff is, I feel like in theater, what we end up talking about. And what I like about residencies is you might talk about, so-and-so has been writing about the loss of their son for the last 25 years through their poetry. So-and-so's son was in the army, and so she's writing about war stuff. Like immigration, whatever the things are that we are passionate about, I'm really interested to have those conversations. And I think residencies offer this chance of a certain group of people that will never be together again, have the chance to have a unique conversation that they will never have anywhere else. And how do we make that conversation happen? And so that's always really interesting to me, to have that.
If there are other questions here, we can also continue the conversation over some.
I have to say, wait, before refreshments, no, there's things I forgot. See over here, I didn't, I think it's fascinating that I'm a writer, because I think words are totally flawed instruments. I don't know if like sculptors or painters feel that way about your mediums, but I feel like I know for a fact, because I work with words all the time, that they are completely flawed. And I find them beautiful like humans, because you can use words to say something that is beyond words. And humans are so flawed, and yet they can transcend their limitations and flaws to do amazing things. And I find that like beautiful and fascinating, and somehow related into how I think about the world and my medium. But they're so inadequate. It's fascinating. It's like taking paint, right? Taking dark things and creating light with it. It's like, I don't know. Yeah, I find that fascinating.
That's a great metaphor. Well, thank you so much, Dean, it's really wonderful to have this insight into your work and your creative practice. And thank you very much for our audience, both in person and also online. Dean is going to be departing this weekend when our next incoming resident arrives. So our next speaker, next Tuesday, will be the Greek visual artist Nina Papakonstantinou. So I encourage both our in-person audience and our online viewers to join us next Tuesday, when we'll have a chance to hear from Nina as she starts off her residency with us. But for now, we can sign off, and thank you so much. This was really a pleasure.
You're welcome.